Today we uncover the harrowing story of the Shellac Massacre in Saskatchewan, Canada, a chilling event that remains the most random act of mass murder in the nation's history. This tragedy claimed the lives of 9 innocent people and reveals a troubling look at how mental illness was dealt with during that time. Join me as we honor the memory of the Peterson family and explore their story. Nestled 55 miles west of Prince Albert, the village of Shellac was a peaceful, rural community known for its farming. In 1967, it was home to just 250 people, making it the perfect place for James Peterson and his wife to set down roots. After serving in World War II, James, a dedicated and community-minded man, bought 328 acres to start a mixed grain and cattle farm. Hard-working and committed, he took on even more responsibility when he inherited an additional 72 acres from his retiring father. Having large farming families was very common in Canada at the time, and the Petersons were no different. Having a total of 9 children, Kathleen aged 19, Jean aged 17, Mary aged 13, Dorothy aged 11, Pearl aged 9, Phyllis aged 4, William aged 5, Colin aged 2, and lastly, Larry aged 1. The Peterson children were seen as good kids who behaved well in school and were well liked by their peers. In fact, the entire family was respected, just an ordinary church-going family that no one had anything bad to say about. Kathleen was the only Peterson child not living at home still. She had recently gotten married and was living in British Columbia with her husband. But the rest of the Petersons lived together in a modest farmhouse, which had a total of 4 rooms with only 2 serving the use of bedrooms. All of the children, except the babies, slept in one room together, while the parents slept in the other room with the youngest children. The Petersons were not wealthy, but they made do with what they had and didn't take anything for granted, especially family. James and Evelyn were very family-oriented and created a home centered around their children because it was what they loved the most. The oldest daughter living at home, Jean, was a promising athlete, and her parents would do anything to nurture her talent. This included finding a way to pay for her to attend an upcoming track camp in Dundurn. To pay for this extracurricular, James decided to call on his neighbor, Will Drew Lang, to help haul 50 bushels of hay to the grain elevator to sell off the following morning, on August 15th, 1967. Lang agreed to help James, and they planned to meet in one of the fields at the break of dawn. But unbeknownst to the Petersons, danger would unexpectedly stumble onto their doorstep. Danger was named Victor Ernest Hoffman, who was 21 years old at the time. Victor was born in 1946 and grew up in an ordinary family of devout Lutherans. His father, Robert, was German, while his mother, Stella, was Ukrainian. And much like the Petersons, they had a large family, with Victor being the 5th of 7 children. The Hoffmans lived in the village of Lisk, located 40 miles southwest of Shell Lake, and they were well known for being hard-working and keeping Sundays holy. Growing up, Victor didn't seem different from his siblings. According to his parents, he hit all of his milestones. He became an excellent farmer, hard-working, and responsible. He had a passion for guns and became an avid hunter. It was noted he was a bit of a loner, since he didn't really have friends, and was a poor student due to his inability to concentrate. His parents claim Victor did not show signs of illness until much later in life. His father equated his issues to a switch. Robert claims it just appeared one day, and then they had to start treatment with a doctor for mental illness. But unbeknown to his parents, Victor suffered in silence far earlier than they assumed. In fact, Victor had been schizophrenic for most of his life. He told his examining psychiatrist he first saw the devil when he was only 6 years old. He described the creature as being 6 feet tall, black as night, and possessing a long tail. He felt he was in the middle of being seduced by Satan and God. Victor claims he would often be awoken in the middle of the night by tapping sounds that would just get faster and faster. By the age of 10, Victor began to experience daily impulses to kill. He fantasized about killing his family and even strangers he had only just met. He kept his problems a secret, especially from his parents. Victor claimed he was able to curb these impulses by directing them towards animals rather than people. He claimed killing animals made him happy and stated, quote, "like it makes any sportsman happy," end quote. The devil had not subsided either. One morning when Victor was eating breakfast, he heard a voice calling out to him. So he goes outside to find the devil in the form of a 6'6" tall man who weighed around 330 pounds and looked like a pig. The devil promised to make him rich if he would bow to him and sell his soul. Victor claimed he didn't want to do this, but he kneeled on one knee with the hopes of becoming half as rich, but this never manifested. He also stated he would see disembodied cold hands floating around the room and he could feel them touch him. The devil visited many times, approaching Victor for his soul, but he wouldn't relent. Shortly after meeting the devil, Victor also began to see angels. The angels, according to him, looked like human beings dressed as women, and they would talk to him often, but not as frequent as the devil. The angels' main purpose was to lead Victor away from the devil's path. One day Victor claimed he received a message from God and the angels that if he was able to catch the devil and destroy him, they would take him to heaven. This request caused Victor to become very erratic. He had a task, and he was going to accomplish it. He tried many ways to catch the devil, including a net, but his plans were foiled every time. So the only logical explanation for him was to try and shoot the devil down. On May 27th, 1967, his mother found Victor in the backyard, shooting into the sky. He had fired off around 3 rounds by the time she made it outside to confront him. Confused and a little scared, Stella questioned her son, who simply replied, Stella asked him not to shoot, and leads him back into the house. Victor puts down the rifle before taking off in the family car. While gone, his mother and his other family members hid all of the guns in the house. Victor returned and asked where the guns were, promising no one would get hurt. He didn't get his guns back, so he left again, returning shortly after and asking to speak to the family pastor. Victor and the pastor spoke in private, and his mother couldn't hear most of the conversation. When the pastor was leaving, he and Victor were standing outside. When she heard her son state, "I'd like to kill my mom," this was the last straw, and his parents made arrangements to have Victor committed the following day at the Saskatchewan hospital. During his initial examination, the attending psychiatrist diagnosed him officially with schizophrenia and felt he needed to be hospitalized. Victor agreed and voluntarily admitted himself. According to the records, he was not only very sick mentally, but physically as well. He was often found talking to himself and laughing alone. He also grew concerned about whether he was a boy or a girl. Victor was very cooperative with exams, but appeared to be withdrawn, vague, and indifferent. He didn't feel like he got along with his family, because they were never able to understand him. He mentioned at one time to his siblings that he saw the devil, and they just mocked him. Victor also claimed the devil was punishing him because he wouldn't sell his soul. He stated he felt like someone else at times because the devil put another brain in his body, and the brain belonged to a girl named Denise, who wanted to be in full control of him. His doctors explained all of these were merely illusions, but Victor protested since he knew for a fact he had touched both the devil and the angels. But Victor quickly saw if he kept claiming to see the devil, he would never leave the hospital. He wanted to be better and not have to live in constant fear. So he was started on a series of electroconvulsive treatments, 12 in total, tranquilizers, occupational therapy, and supportive psychotherapy. After all of this, doctors were convinced Victor understood all of his devil sightings were just his imagination. Victor also seemed to believe it, since he no longer feared the devil, and his mind had never been so clear. He was happy, cooperative, but still inclined to be seclusive at times. Victor may have been free of the devil, but not of his impulse to kill. He still imagined killing his family and peers, and explained to doctors it was for no reason. He just wanted to. Victor's diagnosis was explained to his father, and the doctors claimed he would be as good as ever within a year or two. And despite knowing of Victor's killing impulses, doctors discharged him on July 26, 1967, to his father, equipped with a prescription for tranquilizers. Back at home, Victor tried his best to readapt to the environment he once knew. But he complained his medication made him sleepy and also made his back hurt. Around August 8th, Victor quit taking the medicine altogether because it made him weak and he needed to get back to work on the farm. He claimed he didn't notice any changes until a few days later. On the 11th, Victor had a feeling that something was going to happen. He couldn't explain how or why, but he just knew he would be going to jail or back to the hospital. He obviously didn't want to go to either place, but he really didn't want to go back to the hospital. He stated he would much rather die than be carted back to that place. According to Victor, he had a way of remembering things before they were even going to happen. He called these events visions, and stated they had gone on for as long as he could remember. And every day after this vision, he imagined that he was going to kill someone. He felt that if he could kill someone, maybe he would prove to the devil that he was finally on his side. The day of August 14th was a usual quiet day. Victor worked on the tractor, then fell asleep on the sofa around 9:30 p.m. He was woken up by his parents around 11:30 so he could go lay down in his bedroom, where he fell asleep again until 3 a.m. He woke up and he could not go back to sleep, so he goes to the garage and works until he can't stand it anymore. With nothing more to do, he paced the garage back and forth, just letting his imagination run wild. When he reached the door of the garage, Victor had a strange feeling in the side of his head. He said it felt as though his whole body had been cut in half, and something had left him. It wasn't painful, but more like pleasure, and his urge to kill was even more powerful. He decided to go hunting for small rodents, so he filled up the car, loaded his .22 Browning pump-action repeater rifle, and drove off into the night. He decided he was going to drive for an hour, and then go home and start his daily chores. He was specifically looking for squirrels who lived in spruce trees, but he couldn't find any. So rather than just taking this as a sign and turning around and going home, he continued to drive, and the thought of killing just stayed in his mind. He passed so many houses until close to 6 a.m. He came upon a very ordinary farmhouse, where the urge was the strongest he's ever felt. He'd never seen or been to this house before, but for some reason, it felt so familiar. According to interviews from his trial, the voices told Victor, quote, "This is it. This is where you have to go and do it." End quote. He stumbled into the house where he recognized the kitchen because he'd seen it in a dream. He was quickly met by James Peterson, who lunged himself at the intruder. James put up a fight, but was ultimately shot 7 times trying to protect his family. Victor went back outside to reload his gun and get his bearings when he saw Evelyn climbing out of the window with the youngest son, Larry, in her arms. He shot Evelyn and left her where she fell. Victor then proceeded back into the home, where he shot and killed 6 of the Peterson children at close range who were asleep in their beds. This included Jean, Mary, Dorothy, Pearl, William, and Colin. He did return back to Evelyn, where he took Larry's life as well, claiming it was a mercy killing, since the child was too young to fend for himself alone. Victor justified killing the rest of the family because he had already killed James, and plus he didn't want to leave anyone behind to identify his plates. He collected as many spent cartridge cases as he could find, and left the home. He arrived back to his parents' house around 7:30 in the morning, where he reportedly spent the day feeling sick and horrified for what he'd done. Shortly after, the neighbor Langs arrived at the Peterson farm, but James was nowhere to be found. It was fast approaching 9 a.m. So Lang goes to the house, where he jokingly calls out to James that he slept in, but then he notices the door was ajar. He pushes it open, and to his horror finds James Peterson dead on the kitchen floor. Lange quickly retreats to the family's 57 station wagon. Driving to the nearest telephone around 4 miles down the road, police arrived at the scene and quickly began searching the home for any survivors and clues. There wasn't much, and it appeared there was no motive since the home was not ransacked. Inside, they discovered 28 bullets, with 27 of them hitting their targets. Boot marks were also found on the kitchen linoleum, which no boots in the home matched the prints. They also discovered 5 cartridge casings confirmed to be from a .22 caliber weapon. During the initial victim count, police were stunned when they heard a muffled noise coming from one of the beds. Under the sheets between the bodies of her sisters was 4-year-old Phyllis, the only survivor of the Shell Lake Massacre. Phyllis later recounted she didn't understand the magnitude of the situation, but she knew it had to be bad when the officer who carried her from the scene was crying. In fact, the deaths of the Peterson family were reported as being one of the worst scenes many of the officers had encountered. Phyllis was taken to the nearby home of her uncle, while Kathleen was notified of the crime. Kathleen moved back home to Shell Lake in order to take care of her little sister. Officers were on their hands and knees going through the long grass of the fields looking for anything that could help with the investigation. Roadblocks were set up, and the hunt for the murderer spread throughout the area in an ever-widening circle. They searched for several days with dogs and a search party composed of 250 people, but nothing had been turned up. On the fourth day, however, they got a lucky break. A concerned resident of Lesk walked into the Royal Canadian Mounted Police Detachment office in Shellbrook. The individual explained they should look into his neighbor's son, since not only did he just get out of the mental hospital, but he had a love for guns and hunting. Corporal Charles Nolan and several other police moved quickly. They drove down narrow, winding highways towards the village of Lesk, and eventually ended at the farm owned by the Hoffman family. Corporal Nolan questioned Victor's parents specifically about guns, boots, and their son. A rifle was found on the property and was taken for ballistics testing, despite it not being the same model that police originally thought. During his questioning, Nolan also noticed a pair of boots that were also taken for comparison. Both the rifle and boots came back as a positive identification to the collected evidence from the Peterson home. So on August 20th, 1967, Victor Hoffman was arrested for murdering the 9 members of the Peterson family. Hoffman, who police described as a single, average-built man, was not a bit scared and seemed to behave normally. He surrendered without a struggle, and his arrest came just 3 hours after the funeral for the Petersons. He was taken to the station located in North Battleford, where he didn't say anything for 10 to 15 minutes, but eventually broke down, confessing everything. This included confessing that the devil made him kill them. When asked about Phyllis, Victor claimed he spared the girl because she had the face of an angel. He explained to police for the rest of his victims he didn't respect them because they looked like pigs. His alarming responses were a cause of concern, so rather than being detained in a prison, he was taken to a nearby mental hospital, where he could be properly evaluated. After his examination, he was diagnosed once again with paranoid schizophrenia and was found fit to stand trial. His trial began on January 8, 1968, for 2 counts of non-capital murder. The defense stood firm that Victor would not have done this if it hadn't been for his untreated mental illness. The jury deliberated for 3.5 hours, and despite having evidence stacked against him, Victor Hoffman was found not guilty by reason of insanity. The jury felt the doctor who testified for the defense really solidified to the jury that Victor was ill due to the deep detail, information, and logical approach. They felt he was driven by something he felt was real. Although he would not be in prison for the rest of his life, the judge did rule he would be committed to an institution for the criminally insane. This seemed to hurt Victor more. Reportedly after the verdict, he just looked straight ahead and showed no emotion. Victor Hoffman was placed in an institution in southern Ontario for an indefinite period depending on government regulations. In December of 2001, he was granted supervised access to the nearby towns, but this was as close to free as he ever got. Victor died of cancer while in custody on May 21st, 2004. Kathleen took on the responsibility of raising Phyllis alongside her own children. She and her husband eventually retired from farming and moved to a nearby town after the old family farmhouse burned down. Both Kathleen and Phyllis couldn't help but have lingering frustrations over Victor's release from the institution in 1967. During an interview, Kathleen stated, "For the most part, I'm frustrated with the system that doesn't seem to recognize that these people need help until it's too late to do anything about it." Phyllis shared similar sentiments during her last interview about the subject in 2004 when Victor died. She mentioned how difficult it was to escape the unwanted celebrity that comes with being the lone survivor of a tragedy. Despite this, she and Kathleen both chose to stay near Shell Lake to be with their extended family. Phyllis often discussed how hard it was for her to adjust to not having her family. She always felt out of place, but that was only until she had her son, James, who helped change her for the better. Sadly, in May of 2019, Phyllis passed away from cancer, and it is believed Kathleen is the last remaining Peterson child. A book titled The Shell Lake Massacre was written by Canadian journalist Peter Tadman, detailing the crime. On several occasions, Peter interviewed Victor, who stayed firm that he felt no guilt about what he'd done, and that he still saw the devil, who compelled him to murder so many innocent lives. As we reflect on this dark chapter in Canadian history, it's clear that the Shell Lake Massacre not only transformed the lives of those directly involved, but also ignited a broader conversation about mental health, justice, and the way society handles individuals with severe psychological disorders. This tragedy serves as a stark reminder of the critical need for early intervention and comprehensive mental health care to prevent such devastating events in the future. It underscores the complex interplay between mental illness and criminal behavior, challenging us to seek deeper understanding and more effective solutions. In closing, the memory of the Shell Lake Massacre and its victims continues to resonate, urging us to advocate for changes that ensure a more compassionate and proactive response to mental health challenges within our communities. This story, while deeply saddening, compels us to look forward, striving to build a society that can prevent such tragedies through empathy, education, and unwavering support for those in need.